Steve here with ICRPG behind the DM screen. In this episode, we are going to be converting this into this. Like and subscribe. If you are at all familiar with D&D 5e, then you most certainly will have come across this campaign, The Lost Mine of Phandelver. It is consistently voted as the top best campaign in D&D. If you Google best D&D campaigns, it's most certainly going to be in the top 3. And it's, I believe, included in one of the starter sets for D&D, which means that people that are new to the hobby or new to role-playing games in general often are started out on this campaign. So this is their introduction. So it makes sense that we would look at this as, okay, how do we convert this to an ICRPG campaign, especially if we're working with new players, right? This video actually comes by way of request. One of our viewers asked, hey, how do I convert D&D campaigns or Pathfinder campaigns into an ICRPG campaign? And I'm going to kind of go over some principles that I would use to do that. Now, it's going to be sort of an overview, but essentially it uses the underlying principles and applies them in kind of a step-by-step way. And you'll see that we can do this very, very quickly. So it just made sense for me to start with this campaign. It's one that I wanted to get into anyway. And I think it's just a good introduction, especially if you're new to the hobby. Before we dive into the campaign itself, let me just start by saying that this is going to be an exercise in applying the principles of ICRPG to any campaign rather than, the minutia of this particular campaign itself. We're just going to use it as a template, kind of show you how I would apply the rules or guidelines really of ICRPG to it. In this particular campaign, it's all going to have to do with the goblins, or as we'll call them, the gerblins. I just printed off a copy of Lost Mine of Phandelver from the Beyond D&D website, and that way I could kind of mark it up and show you with a red pen on what I would do. Again, this is just going to be some guidelines, so it already assumes that you've created your characters, okay? Again, this is for 5e, but you would create your characters just like you would with any other ICRPG campaign, just following those simple principles, the simple stats, all that. And that's how we're going to go into it. So as we go through, really the introductions on these are pretty slick. Again, this is the most popular or well-loved, so to speak, campaign in all of 5e. So of course it's going to be super tight in its narrative and everything like that. Nothing you really need to change. This gives a lot of the backstory, and we're only going to go through the first part of this, okay? We're not going to go through the entire 1 through 3 leveling up, all right? So first things first, right here in the description, it's going to talk about easy, moderate, and hard. Sound familiar to those with ICRPG? Now in D&D, what it's going to talk about is rolling a DC 10, DC 15, DC 20, all of that. Basically though, we're going to go ahead and use the ICRPG system and say moderate is the target, whatever that's assigned to. Easy is easy, -3 off the target. Hard is hard, +3 off the target. So not a whole lot to change there. They almost use the exact same wording, except instead of target, they use moderate, okay? So that's right off the bat. Then as we go into it, we look here and it gives other tips. Again, this is for brand new players. So it's a good one to start with, even for ICRPG people, because it gives you kind of an idea of role-playing in general. This talks about role-playing and inspiration. And so what it's going to get at is essentially, does the person act in character? Anything that the DM would award sort of we would call it a hero coin for. And that's what this talks about right here, is this idea of inspiration, something that can be spent later on in the campaign. So anyway, that sounds very familiar with the hero coin. As you get into it, there's the map. As you get into this whole campaign, this is sort of the big bird's eye view, so to speak. We'll get into more maps later. But now we get into part 1, the goblin arrows, okay? And so what we're gonna do is kind of go through there, and again, a lot of it's the narrative, okay? Spelled out on sort of the back scenario and everything like that. And the first thing you're going to want to do is assign a target to the main sort of gist of things that are going to happen. In this case, it's the goblin ambush. And so we're going to run into a bunch of goblins. They're going to ambush. This is supposed to be a low-level campaign. Okay, so again, we're starting with characters in D&D speak at level 1. So we're going to do this goblin ambush at pretty much a low target of 10. Okay, so that's the first thing I'll do. So this whole scenario is going to be assigned its target. Now, as we get up here, this is where things change just a little bit. So we get into goblins, and it talks about the goblin stats. So let's go ahead and take a look at the equivalent to that in ICRPG. And that's essentially what we're going to do throughout this campaign, is look at, all right, what are the encounters, what are the monsters, and what would be sort of a similar equivalent in ICRPG. In this case, goblins equal Gerblin traders. Let's take a look at those. No reason to reinvent the wheel here. Everything is pretty straightforward. Gerblins or goblins are kind of, I guess they're the fodder of low-level campaigns, more or less. They sort of swarm, they come in hordes, they multiply like rabbits, and we'll just kind of go through the equivalent here in ICRPG. They also have low hit points, okay? So you can see it's just 1 heart, 1 HP, +2 strength, +2 dexterity. And here's the thing, goblins are notorious for having crummy weapons, okay? It's all stuff that's cobbled together from things that they've scrunged or scrap-yarded or whatever it would be. So they've got all these garbage weapons, not too difficult. The thing about it is going to be quantity, all right? You're not gonna have just one. You're gonna have quite a few. And the other problem is they will cry for help and get their friends involved. So in this particular case, like it says, a terrified Gerblin will yell for aid. On his next turn, even if dead by then, 1d4 goblin friends will arrive. So they just kind of keep coming. So that's one thing, you kind of want to take them out quick. You want to take them out stealthy, and you don't want to basically wake up the rest of the horde in the cave. So Gerblin traders, pretty good equivalent to goblins. No reason to reinvent the wheel. I just use this straight as it is. In this campaign, there are going to be a couple of, not really side quests, but maybe like little tangential scenarios. For example, a snare or a pit. Again, these all fall under the target of 10 because it's all within the same sort of low-level campaign initial thing, okay? So once you get through that, that's essentially the first foray into RPG that anybody has. Again, these are starting with level 1 characters. So they complete that section, and in D&D, you'd give them experience points. Well, in this case with ICRPG, we'd probably go ahead and just give them loot. They get a little bit of extra loot, and that's sort of a nice little bonus. We don't give them hearts yet because they really haven't earned it, but they have earned some loot to kind of go into the next section. So the next section, Cragmaw Hideout, we're going to beef it up a little bit, okay? So they have a little more experience, they have a little more loot, so we're going to bump the target up to 12. You might want to do 11. I don't think I'd go as high as 13, but 12 seems to be appropriate for this. Again, what you do is you read through the campaign and you kind of think, okay, what's the level of difficulty in this particular setting, and what target could I set to it for ICRPG? All right, moving on. One of the parts, again, straightforward. They go through a cave. There's a kennel where they have wolves, okay? Wolves are one of those things that are essentially going to be a tier 1 monster. And one of the maybe twists is, okay, can these wolves, like dogs, be won over? You know, can you have a pocket full of sausages and somehow get the wolf to be on your side, right? So that's something to consider. But let's take a look at what a tier 1 monster looks like in ICRPG. Tier 1 monsters should essentially be something that's easy to kill, but still presents a threat, especially in a group. So a pack of wolves is kind of a good idea of a tier 1 monster. Again, it's got +2 stat rolls, no effort bonuses, 1 action per turn, 1 heart, and that's for another kind of thing. If you want to make, say, like an alpha wolf, it would be what they would describes the super mook here in the tier 1 monster. So again, what you're looking for is, what do you think is more or less the equivalent of this particular level monster, and then just find that equivalent stat block in ICRPG. It's going to be a whole lot more simple than anything 5e or Pathfinder is going to throw at you. Next we have the cave map. And this cave map is almost going to be similar to a one-off or a one-page campaign like in my one of my previous videos. So what you can do, if you don't want to just keep everything as a 12 target, you can make it so that each one of these areas has a different target. So let's say you find, okay, well, they're now deep in the bowels of this cave and there's some certain kind of pitfalls involved, that maybe that does bump it up to a target 13. So you don't have to keep this whole thing the same target. You can partition it off, so when they enter this, it becomes, back down to 12, or maybe this is easy and that's just an 11, or whatever it would be. But that's what I would do, is basically look again at the scenarios and go, that seems like X difficulty. Just assign it the target, just like you would any other ICRPG. So moving along then, what we're gonna find, again, these are all parts of that cave system. They're numbered, again, laid out really nice and tight, so you might as well use it. And I believe we're getting to the second level here once they get through this cave. Yeah, so they're gonna be, again, awarded experience points. We're not really gonna do that in this case, but what we'll do is award more loot and maybe give the players a heart. They'll be super, super, super excited to have this. And yeah, that's kind of the joy of it. They'll be very appreciative of that heart. Not really going up a level, but making them stronger, giving them more loot for the next scenario. The real fun of this campaign, Lost Mine of Phandelver, in my opinion, is playing up those goblin swarms. So have fun with that. Well, there's a quick and dirty overview on how I convert this into this. Again, it's just a very simple application of principle guidelines. This is not a rule book, it's a guidebook. That's why we like ICRPG so much, because it turns any good campaign into an even better campaign. And I hope that it also showed you that you don't have to do everything from scratch with your homebrew stuff. There are some really excellent campaigns out there. There's some amazingly creative people, tight writing. You can find material, source material for an ICRPG campaign just about anywhere. Old Dragon magazines, Pathfinder, D&D, whatever. You can take some really great campaigns, use their storyline, and then quickly convert it to ICRPG. You saw it really only took me about 10 minutes to do it. So you create your characters, that takes you another 5-10 minutes, and you're up and running with a game that's already there and pretty excellent. So I hope that helped you out, at least to give you a bit of an idea that you can really do this and you can jump right in with ICRPG. So thanks again for watching, and may your dice always roll with advantage.